Well, last week was the first Wednesday, and of course we were doing the singing, and before that I had finished up the parables, and I was kind of wondering what I was going to be doing this class on. But I did find a pretty neat study on I guess you'd say faith in action. We know that faith in our walk with God, we studied James, and we know what James said about faith and deeds, and how we should live our lives according to God's will, and be faithful to Him. But this little series, and I don't know, I think it's 4 or 5 of them, is going to be talking about how is our faith in connection with each other. I think one of the things that we sometimes forget about, our walk not only includes our walk with God, but our walk with our brothers and sisters. And they're put in our lives for a reason. Our families, our friends, our society, and our enemies. They were all, basically all these people were created in God's image. Even our enemies. And how do we relate to them in our walk? How is our example to them? How do we communicate with them? And we're going to look at one example tonight as far as communicating, listening. How well do we listen? Do we listen to God? When we read His Word, we should be listening, correct? And taking it in. How well do we listen to each other? Jill gave an example. I was telling her a little bit about this morning. She gave an example. She says, sometimes I'm so, how did you state it? I'm thinking so hard on how I'm going to answer that I forget to listen. Now, how many times do we do that? When you're thinking so hard on how to answer them, and you're not even listening to what they're saying. And I find myself in that same position many times. I'm thinking, okay, now how am I going to answer this? I mean, is this going to be a rebuttal? How am I going to do this? And you're not even listening to what they're saying. Jill?
Well, it was kind of more or less like, you want to say something, and so I'm not really paying attention.
Right.
I want to say, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say.
Exactly.
I'm thinking about what I'm going to say.
You're listening but not hearing.
But
right,
not, exactly.
Yeah, listening, not hearing. And
Right.
So,
Or you think you know what they're going to say.
Right. You're anticipating what they're going to say, and it's not even
It may
there.
not even be it.
So we're going to look at a few, tonight we're going to look at one, and then in the coming weeks we're going to look at a few of them. Different examples biblically of how we should relate to God and to our brothers and sisters. When God was in the garden, He was with Adam and Eve, and they communed together. And I honestly, I don't know how that would be, to be in the presence of God in the Garden of Eden, the perfect place. How could that have felt? I know we don't quite have that here. We will have it in heaven. But they were communing with God. And then Satan came on the scene, and then all of that went by the wayside. That closeness, Andrew.
At that point, they were able to commune with God because they were without sin
Exactly.
at that point. But when you look at the children of Israel, they were frightened by the presence of God because they were not without sin.
Exactly. Exactly. And we, as it says, we should fear God in a godly way. We should be the same way. We are sinful people. Even though we are Christians, we still sin. Even though we are children of God, we still sin, unfortunately. But we face a lot of challenges today in this world, and no more challenges than what they did then. We have the same thing. A lot of people will say, "Oh, well, it was so much different back then, and it was easier, maybe, to be close to God. There's just too many distractions now." It's been the same the whole time. Ever since Satan has entered in the scene, it's been the same. Same challenges, whether it be within the family, within the church family, in the neighborhood, whatever. Still the same challenges. So we're going to look at a few of these. Well, basically, the first one is Luke 2:46. Now this is when Joseph and Mary had went to the feast of the Passover. Jesus was how old? 12 years old. They have attended the feast. They're heading home. They look for Jesus and he's not there. They can't find him. So they go back to Jerusalem to look for him. Verse 46, after 3 days they found him in the temple. So after 3 days of looking in Jerusalem, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Okay, now here is a child of 12 in the temple, and what's he doing? What's the first thing it says? He was what? Listening. And then asking questions. Now this is in the temple courts. These are very learned, elderly men, elders of the church, I guess you might say. And he's amongst them, a child. And he is listening to them and then asking questions. Now, it doesn't give us any specifics there per se. But how do you think that he was received?
Well, 47. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers.
Okay, they were amazed. So they weren't putting him down because he was a child, were they? Because he was young.
Initially, they might have been skeptical. In my mind, I'm just like,
As-
that's an assumption, but, but...
As human beings, okay?
Yeah, you'd be like, nah.
The human thought process. Do we have that same thought sometimes? When we see someone that's younger, we say, well, there's no way that they're going to know. I mean, we kind of take what they have to say kind of with a grain of salt, like, man, he doesn't have the experience. He's not mature. He doesn't know.
Well,
Yeah.
you see, they were, like Abby was saying, it says they were amazed. So they were questioning him. And then, but, the other thing to note here is not only was he listening, but he was giving answers.
Right.
So a 12-year-old's talking to these wise men,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, wow, where's this coming
Exactly.
from?
Exactly. But I can almost imagine what it would be like to be amongst them and seeing all these elderly, gray-bearded men of, wise men. And here's this 12-year-old kid. And he's listening to them, and then he's asking questions. And then as it says, they were amazed and astonished at his answers. And they're thinking, how does this kid know this stuff? Now, I don't think that probably a lot of this that he was speaking of here was taught to him that much by his parents. Because I think, to a certain degree, they would have been teaching him, but I think he was coming up with some answers that were far beyond what would be expected from Mary and Joseph. Because later on, in 48, when his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you. Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. They didn't quite understand what was going on. But yet, whoever was in the temple there, the elders there, they were understanding a lot of what was going on. Because this boy of 12 was by far wiser than they have ever seen before. But the key is that he was listening. Even though Jesus at 12 is still, we always think of Jesus as a man when he was teaching, that he was larger than life. He was with his disciples. He was teaching profound things, performing miracles and that. At 12, how was he? He was larger than life at 12. Because these learned men were wondering, where is he getting this information? Why would he have to listen to them? He already knew, didn't he? What do you think, Paul? It's going around in your head.
Yeah. You think about what these guys are typically talking about. Much of their discussion was, Rabbi so-and-so says this, and somebody said, but Rabbi so-and-so says that, and Jesus gives an answer that's not about any of that.
Mm-hmm.
About my Father's business. They're amazed it's a whole different kind of answer.
Right.
It's not even the way they're thinking.
Right. Well, and it's like you say, they developed a lot of traditions and laws and things like that, the Jewish rabbis and like you say, it was kind of I wouldn't say as a good old boys club, but they did have that kind of a rhetoric, I think, of, well, what did you think, Rabbi? And what did you think,
At the heart of their discussion, they're still, it's maintaining what they want it to be.
Right.
What they want God to be. And here's this 12-year-old boy that's looking at God in a totally different way.
Right.
And it would
And to think that this is basically, as we've said, I think we pretty much understand, this is God in the flesh, basically. Jesus being there. And he knows what's going through all of their heads. And he has, I don't know, I guess he has, I would think that he would have knowledge of who he is, why he was sent. Even though this is before he was baptized, before he started his ministry, I think he would still know who he was, wouldn't he?
Because of his, based on the response to his mother.
Right.
He knew what it-
Exactly. He's getting on with his father's business. He knows who he is. Now, with someone with that power, with that presence, why would he listen? Why didn't he just go in and say it? But he humbled himself to listen to what they were saying. And then ask questions. And I'm sure that, like Paul said, they're probably talking amongst themselves, and he's at, well, why are you referring to Rabbi so-and-so and what he says?
And think of later the type of questions he asked. He's asking those kinds of questions.
Right.
Which would test their attitudes.
Mm-hmm. Because he knows what is going to be happening in the future. And he knows that probably some of these very men that he's talking with in the temple are going to be ones that are going to be against him. When he's ministering, when he's before Pilate, those same men are probably going to be spitting at him and taunting him at the base of the cross. Yes, Dan?
And he also, this is kind of slightly off subject, sorry, but I can't, always when I read this, I think about Mary and Joseph. Here, we've all probably lost a child for a minute or two,
Mhm.
and you
Frantic.
totally frantic. They're upset,
Mhm.
and then and knowing who he is, and maybe even, they may have even not thought about it for the minute, but then to have your son say, I must be about my father's business, that had to be hard parenting. Because like, what do you question?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and honestly, when you lose a child and the child sees the father and the mother, they were scared too, weren't they?
Yeah.
And the first thing they want to do is get close to them. And they say, where did you go, And his answer is, I'm about my father's business.
Yeah. Did you know
just,
that?
just, like you should have known.
Yeah.
Joe.
Well, if you go back to 40, that same chapter, the child continued to grow and become strong, increasing in wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. And then you go to 52, and Jesus kept increasing in wisdom and stature and in favor of God and man.
Right.
So he was a continual,
Mhm.
from the time he was born, probably.
Oh, yeah. This gives the example as a child, but I'm sure that, clear on through till he was baptized at what, 30, Paul, is that correct? Around 30 years old? So he's got another 18 years. Adolescence, teenager, all that time. And I'm sure that he had several instances that he was going about his father's business. We don't have a lot of those recorded here, but this is just one of them at the age of 12. Go ahead, Cindy.
So who are they referring, who is Jesus referring to in verse 50? And they did not understand the saying that they spoke to him.
His parents.
But his parents knew who he was.
What they didn't understand about him?
They didn't understand what he was doing.
Right. He says,
When he said, I'm about my father's business, they're like,
yeah, but they didn't understand what he was saying to them. They couldn't understand, what do you mean about your father's business?
Yeah, we have the whole story, so we know the ending. For them, they know he was a gift from God, but certainly they didn't know what he was going to go through.
No.
And his ministry and his crucifixion.
Right.
They didn't understand that at all, because even his apostles that were with him frequently didn't understand what he was telling them.
Right. Yeah, they didn't get it. Even to the end, when he was arrested, they said, well, this can't be. This can't be. This is our Savior. How can he be arrested? How can he be killed? But yet they knew he was special because he was given to them in a very special way. But they didn't know the whole thing. And yet Jesus did. He knew what he was going to be about his Father's business from day one.
and you see that throughout the entire New Testament. The disciples never understood him until the Holy Spirit came upon them after his resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
They did. Even walking with them, they're like, I don't know what's all going on.
Right. And that's another thing. Jesus was walking with the disciples, teaching them 3 years. How much were they listening? I mean, as has been pointed out, they listened to every word he said. And yet, were they really hearing it? I mean, how many times did he say, I'm going to be going away from you? I'm going to be going. And they said, well, what do you mean going? What do you mean going to the next town? You taking a vacation? What do you mean? No, I'm going to be going away. Paul.
It's interesting, their parents were distressed, and then it says his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. She's seeing, as Joe mentioned in verse 40, his increase in stature and wisdom. She's seeing in verse 52 his increase in wisdom. And, Jesus is often described prophetically as a tender shoot. Or, and this is really like this young shoot blooming, that whole process. And, she was distressed, as any mother would be, to see what's transpiring in her son's life.
Right. And it's like, and of course, I'm not a mother, but it's like any mother that I have talked to, their children are precious. And they don't want anything to happen to them. And yet here he's lost. I mean, he's not in the caravan. They go back to Jerusalem and they still search 3 more days. Jerusalem wasn't a small bird like Salmon. It was big. Lots of little cubby holes where kids could be, playing, whatever. Who knows what happened to him? They're frantic. Probably the last place that they would think of looking is in the temple.
He was lost to them, but he didn't.
He wasn't
lost.
Right. He knew exactly where he was at and what he needed to be doing.
Actually, he was where they left him. They left.
Yeah. And this leads a little bit into what we're talking about as far as listening. She didn't understand, did she, what he said? I'm going about my Father's business. She didn't quite understand. She was listening, but did she truly understand what she was hearing? Same thing as we said with the disciples. Walking 3 years with Jesus. They were listening to him every day. His teaching as he taught the crowds. Did they truly let all of that listening sink in? Jill?
Well, let's think back up in when Simon in 34, that's when he was a baby, right? And Simon blessed them and said to Mary, his mother, Behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rise of many in Israel, and for a sign to be opposed. And a sword will pierce even your own soul, to the end that thoughts from many hearts may be revealed. And there's many in the scriptures concerning Mary. She's either thinking about it or pondering it. She heard this. She may not have understood it, but she did. Mary would always think about it. She treasured it, treasured it in her heart, or she would ponder the things that were said, or that what she witnessed.
Right.
So she knew something.
She knew something was very special.
Something.
And it was going to be something very great because it was talking about how many people would be affected.
And that her heart would be pierced.
Right. And at 12, when she lost him, that probably that thought was going through her mind. Is this it? Did I lose him at 12? Was he taken by robbers? Paul.
It's typical of how Jesus always answered questions. He answered questions to open the ears of those who want to hear.
Right.
They don't understand that answer when he first gives it. But those who aren't hearing, who have ears to hear,
Right.
he's opening them up to that.
And that's our perfect example, isn't it? He is our perfect example. When we listen, are we hearing? Are we listening to learn and learning to listen? That's what Jesus was doing. He was listening to learn from them. He was learning to listen from them. And were they listening to learn from him? Because what he was saying in those temple courts was something that was very profound. It was astonishing to them. They couldn't understand, how can a 12-year-old boy know these things? And that is the same thing that we need to be doing with our brothers and sisters. How well do we listen to our brothers and sisters? I mean, when we have conversations, are we truly listening? Or let's just kind of go through the motions of listening and not really take in what they're saying? When Jill has a conversation with Terry concerning the Bible and different things, I'm sure that being a new Christian, it's probably hard for him to fathom some of the things that she's saying. But if he is truly listening, then he will catch on to those things. But when we're talking in this situation, when Jill is talking to Terry, is she listening to what he is saying? I think that's the important part of us as Christians when we're talking to people in the world. Are we truly listening to what they're saying, and are we understanding what their need is? Andrew?
We use this discussion in our meetings that I go to a lot, and it's the difference between listening to respond and listening to understand.
Yep.
If you understand what that person's trying to say, where they're coming from, or you just, like Jill said, are you thinking about what I'm going to say next? And
Exactly.
I'm completely spaced out on their last couple sentences. I don't recognize what they're really trying to tell me.
Right. You're just listening to respond.
And as soon as you think you know what they're going to say, you start thinking
Right.
about, what am I going to say next?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of waiting till they're done.
Right.
Okay, now it's my turn. How would I respond to what they just
Right.
told me?
And contemplating on what they are really saying.
Yeah.
Trying to really understand. And if you don't, maybe ask some questions. Because a lot of times when people communicate, they don't know really how to communicate totally. They know something has got to come out of them, and they're hoping that somebody will understand it. But sometimes it needs to be pulled out of them, I guess. Paul?
I think the perfect example of this is Jesus with the woman at the well.
Yep.
He opens the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But no sooner is it open, she's the one asking him questions.
Any questions? Exactly.
This is what she needs to know, this is what she wants to know.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a canned presentation that he came to
Right. And how great would that be if we could do that? That if we could start a conversation with someone out in the world, and the next thing you know, they're asking us, but what is it that I need to do? What is it that I need to have to be like you? Have you ever had that happen? Wouldn't it be great if they were asking you? And that's exactly what happened there with the woman at the well. But that's what we need to do, is to find out what everybody in the world that is not a Christian, what do they need? What do they need? Salvation? Do we have the key to that? Do we have the knowledge to teach them how to be saved, how to be put in Christ, how to put Him on, how to receive the Holy Spirit? We have that knowledge, don't we? When we listen to them and we detect they're missing something, life is tough. Most people will talk about all the things that happened to them. Boy, life is tough. The car broke down last week, and the kids, they don't have any shoes. And boy, this economy is terrible. The dollar just don't go anywhere. Do we have something that would help them? That would give them hope? And if we're truly listening, can we give them hope in whatever they're asking for? Because that's what most people will be doing. They'll be asking for help. And yet, many times we say, yeah, the weather is awfully mild for this time of year. Or boy, yeah, the economy, boy, I'm sure glad that, that we got a change in the presidency. And we don't take advantage of listening to them, and then, as Jesus did, giving them answers that will astonish them, that will amaze them. We have that ability. We have that same ability. We always think that, well, Jesus, he was special. Yes, he was. He was all-knowing. But how much do we know?
No.
We know enough, don't we? Each one of us knows enough to tell someone what it's like to be a Christian. Are we happy to be a Christian? Are we thrilled to death? Are we overjoyed? Do we act like it when we're around others? If we don't, what is there for them to want? Why would they? The woman at the well is talking with a Jew. They don't get along. Samaritans and Jews, they don't get along. But she's talking to him. He opened the conversation, and now she's asking questions. He's telling her, this water you're drawing, it's good for a little time, but I got something better for you. And she's interested. She's conversing with him. And then when she knows who he is, when he says, I am he, what's she do? Immediately runs back to the village and tells everybody. Has anyone ever brought someone to Christ and that has happened? When you've brought them to Christ and they are so thrilled to death that they are going to go tell everybody that they know. There could be. Have we experienced that? How would that make you feel? Would it be uplifting? Would it be thrilling to see the joy in someone else? I mean, I seen it firsthand when Terry went under that water up there. I know you couldn't see it because it was below the horizon there. But when he came up, there was nothing like that smile on his face. Nothing like it. He was thrilled. And I'm thinking, we need to be that thrilled every day because we are in Christ. We're clothed with him. Joe.
He said today, I've been so scared.
Scared?
I've been so scared.
Yeah.
He says, I'm not scared anymore.
Mm-hmm. The confidence that Christ should give us, the boldness that we should have, there's nothing like it. We haven't even tapped into it. We are the strongest entity in this world. Do you realize that? We have the mightiest king over us that gives us power. Do we take advantage of that? He gives us power every day. And yet, what do we do with it? Do we squander it? I'm a little busy. Got a lot of things on my mind. I need to slow down. I'm hurting too much. There's every excuse in the world. And the thing that I'm always reminded of is that there's so many out there that are not going to make it. And it's on us. We are responsible to go out and teach them. It tells us that's what we're to do in Matthew 28. We are to go out and teach them. We have the power, we have the ability, we have the responsibility. But do we do it? Something to think about. I didn't get through all of the lesson, so we may get a little bit more of this next week, but I think what we had tonight was extremely good. But I think we do need to listen more attentively to those that don't have Christ and find out how we can help them. Yes, most of the time they want something physical. But sometimes that's the inroad to give them something spiritual. It's just like our ham giveaway. That was a physical thing. That was contacting people. That was looking them eye to eye. We don't know what will come of that. But if we have any contact with them later on, then it's our responsibility to try to teach them and show them who we are spiritually. Not that we're just a physically loving people that likes to give away hams, but we truly care about their soul. Because our actions, if our actions show that we really don't care about their soul, we have to question who we are. Because that is not what God's plan was. I've talked enough. I'm